Welcome to the Belonging Podcast by Elevate Villages. This is a space where real stories open hearts, widen circles, and remind us that we truly belong to each other. I'm your host, Melissa, and I'm excited to introduce our guest today. Her name is Hillary Van Welter. She is a masterful facilitator, a visionary thinker, and one of the most genuinely caring, awesome humans that I know.
Wow.
Since coming into my life a year ago, she's opened up different facets of how I understand belonging, and she's really expanded my hope for what happens when people are truly seen. She's also stoked my imagination for the future and what's possible. So welcome, Hillary Van Welter. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, Melissa, I'm so thrilled. It's always wonderful to be in the same room with you. And it's also wonderful to explore this with you because when you first launched the Belonging Roundtable, I must admit I went, "Oh, here we go again on belonging," because it's become such a popular topic and written a lot about. But you conducted it in such an intriguing and interesting way, and the people you curated to come together to talk about it was brilliant. So I'm really happy to see where this conversation takes us in understanding this concept that it in many ways has been misunderstood, I think, for a long time. This concept called belonging.
Yeah, I love it. My first question was actually going to be to you, like when you hear the word belonging today, this week, this month, like what does it stir in you?
It stirs curiosity, and years ago when I was working on a project here in I live in Canada. I live in a place called Newmarket, north of Toronto. I was doing work with with the region around waste management, and we started to look at it through the lens of smart living. And one of the bylines that came to me one day when we were working on this initiative was, "We have to drop the S from belongings and get to
Mm,
belonging."
mm,
Because waste management was all about a lot about, the fact that we have so much consumer goods, and we focus a lot of our ways of looking at the world, our idea of success, our concept of wealth on belongings. And yet, if we just drop the S, we start to have a whole different understanding. And I think we're undergoing a revolution, evolution of sorts, where we're moving into a world where relationships are incredibly important, more important than they've ever been. And that in the relational world, a sense of being with others and being with others in ways that where you feel comfort, where you can explore. We all have different reasons for coming into relationship with people, but one of the core feelings we wish to have when we're in with this group of people is a sense of belonging. And that means different things to different people. It is it's not a cookie cutter word that is the same thing. It is very much influenced by intergenerational perspectives and what kind
mm.
of intergenerational trauma, drama, richness, wisdom that you carry in your genetics will also inform what that word means to you.
That's true. And I think that's one of the things that sort of propelled me to have the Belonging podcast is because, I'd read some academic work on it. With Elevate Villages, I knew that the core principle is belonging. Who've aged out of the foster system with no belonging, and we see what happens to them. But the more I explored belonging, the more like nuance is a very complex issue. There's no right definition. There's some interesting definitions. And I think I'm also noticing, and I'm so excited over the life of this podcast to explore more layers and facets of it. And I feel like different seasons, it's going to mean different things to me, and different occupations and different moments and in different relationships, that belonging's going to have its own nuances. I think it's such a beautiful thing to talk about because at the end of the day, it's about humans connecting in
So
whatever form that's going to be.
let's explore it through the seasons. because that's a realm I love. So let's say we're in winter now here in the Northern Hemisphere. So belonging in the winter is an interesting dynamic in terms of it normally means that we cocoon. It means that we, like bears, we go and find our caves and we hibernate. It doesn't mean we're not doing anything. It means that we are, and like the earth during that time, reneutralizes and renourishes itself, but it's much more of an inner type of experience. And so when you connect to belonging in the winter, you're normally is finding a sense of belonging with yourself because
Mm.
that's where it has to start in many if you don't feel you belong in your body, it's very hard to belong with others. So,
Oh, wow.
it's a time in winter to be able to explore more of that inner belonging. And who do you want to be in the cave with? Who do you want to be hibernating with? You know, you need safety, you need to be feeling comfort, you need to be out of the cold, you need to feel that you have the security of being able to withdraw in some cases, to be able to recalibrate. And that's what nature does during the winter. It begins its recalibration so that in the spring, when all of the work has been done underground, and the reneutralizing and renourishing underground, and let's say that's in ourselves, we've done that. In the spring, we start to feel a sense of, okay, now, where is belonging calling me?
Mm.
Where am I being called to in the spring? The sprouts that are starting to come up, the new sort of possibilities that are starting to emerge. Um, there's a newness to spring. And so belonging in that season is maybe looking at different kinds of belonging, different places of belonging, different people to which you wish to have relationships with. And then when we move into the summer, it's the flourishing. It's the time of real flourishing, and I think that often when people are speaking about belonging, they're talking about it in terms of that richness, of the flourishing, of feeling that sense of community, feeling that sense of connection, feeling that sense of relationship, and we tend to put like that's a summer. I would for me, that would be a summer type of belonging, and then in the fall in life cycles, things start to harvest what it is that we have experienced over the other 3 seasons, and we get ready to we often as a spiral of growth happens, we start to become a bit more wiser. We start to
Mm.
understand what is our learning. We're harvesting our experiences, and so belonging in that form again takes on a different texture and feeling because we're looking at what are we letting go of in order to be able to really sense our own sense of belonging as well as with others. And then of course the cycle starts again when we go back into the winter. So it's a very different cyclical kind of feel in which nature is an incredible guide for understanding the sense of belonging.
Do you have a favorite?
No, I don't really. I've got to, give a caveat to my understanding of belonging started in the womb with a twin sister. So I came into the world with another being. When you look at the sense of belonging in twindom, there's some fascinating dynamics that go along with that. And in this lifetime, my twin sister and I have gone into very deep connective relationships, and then we've moved apart, and then we've gone back into deep.
Mm.
And the sense of belonging to each other is one of the constants that's always there, that is a bond that will go forever in our lives, no matter we've divorced each other at times and come back and reconciled again. So I think, Melissa, for me, my favorite kind of belonging is the richness of the fullness of what that concept can be. And there's times, even recently last week, where I sat down looking at where is it I do belong. I was visiting with my eldest son and my beautiful grandchildren and daughter-in-law, and they have a very different life to what I experienced. And then I was on the road facilitating a transformational work with a corporate group. in a very well-known international nonprofit, and when you're in those dynamics, you do say, "Where is it I belong?" And then coming home to I have often a volatile situation at home. So you have to sense who you are at your core, but that can also anybody that tells me they really know who they are, oh, I said, "Well, wait till the universe hears that." Because the trickster will be showing up in your life and will be giving you a gift that we don't really always know who we are, and that when we feel a sense of belonging, I think it's those moments that we really know who we are.
Mhm.
That's how, so
Yeah,
I think that probably would be the most, but I think you can have that in the different seasons. It just feels a little different.
I would agree. Yeah, the whole thinking of seasons and then like the real seasons and then like the seasons in our life, but comparing them to the living system. Ooh, that gives me a whole new thing to think about this week. Thank you.
And it
Well,
does change
let's.
with the seasons of our lives too, absolutely. I think I look at my grandchildren and their sense of my grandson, was born in the States, but and so he's got, like, 3 passports. He's got, he's American, my son's Canadian, and his mother is Swedish. When they travel, you should see the array of passports. My granddaughter has both a Canadian and a Swedish passport. Um, what's really interesting about them is that no matter where they travel, and they go back to Sweden every year for the summer, but live in Boca Raton during the winter because of my son's job, and also now the rebooted career that my daughter-in-law has as a figure skating coach. What's really interesting is these kids have they have an inner sense of belonging no matter where they are. There's just
Mm,
an innate feeling of belonging. And then our systems and whatever we do with schools and other things tend to eradicate or do a number on that inner belief around belonging.
yeah. Yeah, I think I've had like a really true sense of belonging to myself. I've just always felt that. So I may not have felt like I've belonged in a lot of other places in my life, but I've always belonged to myself. And so I've
Mm,
moved a lot. I've had a lot of change in my life, and I still always have peace because I always get to be with me where I know I belong. And like just the different
mhm,
facets and constantly learning and becoming new versions of myself, better. Like I would hope I don't ever stop growing and evolving as a human. Like I don't at 70, I don't want to be the same person I am now at 54. And I don't I and I'm so glad that's not the same person as when I was 34. And I
right.
I love my 34-year-old self. And
Mhm.
I love that I've grown and learned and I think for me, that's a lot of what belonging to myself looks like.
But what's interesting is all of those still live in you, and so they never go away. And so I know that I have a feeling whenever I'm about to really step into something very different of a 17-year-old when I went to university. And that feeling of what it felt like, it was this idea of, my gosh, I've never lived away from home. This was a very new experience. And being on a university campus. And I remember looking at the time feeling incredibly scared and excited at the same time. So I know that feeling, and that's exactly the feeling I get when I'm about to go into something new, no matter at 73. I know that 17-year-old will be coming back and saying, "Okay, Hillary, we're going into a new one again, so let's get ready."
So does belonging to yourself mean that the next time you go through that, like your 17-year-old self has experienced it and now can help your today self? Like, is there some sense of ease of going through that type of hey, something new, everything's changing because you've been there? Does belonging to yourself help that, do you think?
I think it definitely helps. I think it's a double-edged sword because I think that if you get locked into any identity, that is
Mm,
probably one of it can atrophy. And and so having these sense of selves alive and well and keeping evolving, but also knowing that you've been there before, but you haven't because you haven't been through this change. And
True.
this is a very different context. It's all contextual. It's almost like belonging is a motion sensor. It's sort of telling us how we're like, when
Mm.
you're in the darkness, walk physically somewhere and a light goes on. And that's the motion sensor telling you something so there's movement in the dark. Belonging can be a really interesting motion sensor because it can be a feeling you have that will tell you, is this safe? Is this not safe? Do I feel connection? Do I not feel
Mhm.
connection? So again, it can be that feeling of belonging can becomes a range of, it can provide us with incredible insights.
I agree. I agree. Growing up, my belonging for me, I felt now as an adult was very conditional. And so I
Mhm.
became the version of me that
Yeah.
would belong in the family. And when that was no longer authentic, like it was creating years of chronic pain that I finally had to start doing the work to clear out, wait, who am I? And where do I truly belong? And it's been lifelong work. And but yeah, definitely feeling if you belong or you don't belong or belonging with conditions, like those are all a lot of different layers of being human.
But it also could be an indicator of evolutionary sparks. And where is my next evolution? Where is my next turn of the cycle in terms of my own letting go of certain beliefs or
Mhm.
conditions of myself? And what is this next turn of the cycle going to allow for me to actually explore and evolve? And often when, the idea that we outgrow certain places,
Mhm.
we
Mhm.
couldn't stay in high school all our lives, and some people do, mentally, but,
You're
and
right.
emotionally.
Yeah.
They're some great high school people. But again, it's often that as we grow up, our bodies are changing and shifting, and we can feel very comfortable with a group one day, and then it doesn't all of a sudden, and we can't really detect necessarily what happened or what the
Mhm.
dynamic was. You just don't feel the same connection. You just don't feel the same, dynamic, of belonging with a certain group, and
Right.
and then and then then you're in that hallway of the in between, where you've left one group of belonging, and you know that you're going to belong again, with another group, but you don't know who they are yet, and so that's also a very interesting sort of stage, but it is those stages of, again, connecting, of letting go of a certain kind of belonging and allowing ourselves to be taken to the next, which is all part of our own evolution.
I love that. There's so many things in there. A perfect transition into the next thing I really, really want to spend some time talking about. And that was how you and I met.
Mm.
So the evolutionary sparks, the coming into new community, all of that is makes our relationship so special. So um for our listeners, Hillary and I are both part of a group called Corliss, and it's a beautiful group of people coming together for one purpose, which was thinking about money systems differently for female entrepreneurs. Over the years, however, and I've only been apart for a couple years, it's shifting to how are we going to move into a better future. I'm not saying that super eloquently, but anyway, in Corliss, we have meetings, and a couple years ago, they decided to do these things called pods, where anyone in the community could host one. So, for instance, with Elevate Villages, I'm really interested in co-living and different models and how do we come together and live like a village rather than in our little silos of independence. And so I hosted one called Village Viewpoints. And so we talked about co-living, and there's always, 4 to 6 people in a pod. And so my Village Viewpoint one was amazing. I have just scads of like resources now as I'm moving into Elevate Villages um becoming into the world. And the next cycle, I'm signing up, which pods do I want to be in? And I had a pretty heavy period of time in front of me. So as I was looking through all the different pods, there was one, and I had to write it down. I had to go back and look at it, Hillary. It was titled Unleashing and Weaving Evolutionary Sparks. Now, I don't know what the description was, but I can tell you I had no idea what it was about, but it just sounded so much fun. Like it sounded like, ooh, this is a pod that's going to draw the people that I want to belong with. So yeah, I signed up for Hillary's Unleashing and Weaving Evolutionary Sparks pod. And what I really want to delve into today during this podcast is what was it about this pod
Mm,
that created such a deep and impenetrable sense of belonging? Like the five of us, and then one more came along. I feel like I have known this group since I was in preschool.
yeah.
Like I'm probably closer to our pod than I'm maybe closer to any other like adult humans. Like there was something, Hillary, that you facilitated. And I think it was also maybe had to do with the mix of people and our vulnerability coming in the space. But I want to talk some today about how did you build that? What worked? Um, how do we go
Mhm,
from sort of a surface community to like really belonging? So I'll tell you my first little experience and then I'm going to let you take it over after that. So the first day, this is like a global world experience, which is great because you get such different perspectives from people in different countries. Um, so we get there, we maybe introduced ourselves, but it was very minimal. And Hillary, you guided us into a like workshop type thing for the next couple of times we got together called A Taste of Wonderland.
mhm.
And we went through the hallway of doors, the pool of tears, the looking glass, and we ended with having a Mad Hatter's tea party. Now, to the listeners and viewers, that probably sounds like, what in the world? If you ever get to experience, do it. It was so much fun. But my theory is that because of the work you had us do, where we were going into what's fractured in my life, what do I see as a better possibility? What are the better, what is this pool of tears? Like you just used so much um analogy from
Mhm,
Alice in Wonderland that we got really deep really fast. And I
mhm.
stopped seeing Sam as someone who lived over in Europe. And I started seeing her as someone who was grieved about the inequity and the injustice to women. And so that's my theory of how we got so bonded and belonged to each other at such a deep level in such a short period of time, having never met in person. Um, but I want to hear your thoughts on that and your observations from being the facilitator of the group.
Well, what's interesting was that Vicky Saunders, who's the founder of Coralus, approached me and asked me if I would like to. She knew about A Taste of Wonderland and asked me if I would like to come in as an activator and start and offer A Taste of Wonderland. And the origins are really important to where that process came from. It was during COVID, and my all of my work was outdoor space redesign, community redevelopment, very high community engagement, and redesigning public space. So it was all outdoor, all group, and so when COVID hit, everything shut down.
Hmm.
So, like many of us, turned to the internet, and in one of the forums I was in, some fellow said about he was talking about the ecosystem and how the competition was being annihilated in the competition, and I put into the chat that ecosystems don't annihilate competition. That's not how they operate. And a fellow by the name of Alex Pantia from Melbourne, Australia, saw that comment and reached out to me on LinkedIn. And we immediately bonded and would meet weekly because we just had this strong synergy. And one day, so we started meeting in September. One day, I said to Alex, I really feel like I've fallen down the rabbit hole. And he said, there was an exhibit in Melbourne a year ago called The Lost Map of Wonderland. I took one look at it and I said, this is a discovery process. And I'd been designing things like this for a very long time because I'd integrated healing with strategy work. And so they were blended together. And when I looked at this, I said, this is an amazing template. So it was so many places. I thought, well, we could only do like 4. And so I went away and designed something, and then Alex found all kinds of people to test this with in Australia. And a lot of it was around business. So looking for testing for business. So again, the hallway of doors is when Alice falls down the rabbit hole, and she gets really frustrated because she's too big for this. She's too small for that. And so it's all the frustrations and the breakdowns that she's feeling. That was the hallway of doors. Then she cried so hard that she created the pool of tears. So then the pool of tears, and it was really interesting. I had designed similar processes to this, but COVID really demanded we allowed for grief because people were grieving a lost life, a life that they had that they weren't living anymore. And then after that, there needed to be, so what you're talking about is that, yes, you got to go into the breakdowns inside, and you got to go into the grief and share those in the context of Alice in Wonderland, because that made it a different experience. And even if we haven't read it a lot, we've heard it, it's a context we understand. And intuitively and Lewis Carroll understood very much about psychology and psychosis and all kinds of different dynamics when he wrote Alice in Wonderland. Because the Mad Hatter, he's got 2 numbers that are on a little piece of paper in his hat. And those were the amount of mercury that was being used by hatters. And so many of them were going insane. So that's why the character was the Mad Hatter. But what I
Interesting.
wanted to do was to have, so you had these breakdowns and grief, something that was you needed to move into something positive. And so the looking glass, which has always been the alternative view, was a place where new ideas were shared and new and wow, what makes us excited? Not hypothetical. These all had to exist. And they could range from businesses to experiences to whatever. And then at the end of it, at the Mad Hatter Tea Party, you took one of the cracks, one of the pain points, one of the wow ideas from the Mad Hatter Tea Party, and put them together, and made a new concept, a new idea. So any one of the solutions was grounded in something that was a breakdown, because
Mhm,
that's where the opportunity for change is.
mhm,
When I came to bring it into Corliss, it was a well-tested experience, but we needed to have something at the focal point. Like it could have been business in the past, right? I've done it for business, mental health, number of different focus. For this one, it felt like there was something moving inside Corliss that was we hadn't quite been able to put our finger on yet, but we knew it was emerging. And so this was an opportunity for for members from Corliss from different parts. And in Canada, we had 2 representatives from Canada, myself and Wendy. And Wendy was from the north. So 2 very different perspectives coming from the Yukon as Southern Ontario, and then yourself in Texas, and then Sam in the UK. So, but it was it was the entire process. And because if we'd just done the first 2, we wouldn't have gotten into, now what do we do with this grief and these breakdowns? And we all had different versions of that. So it lent itself to deep sharing. It lent itself
mhm,
to creating something together, to in the co-creation. There were a lot of different components to it that allowed it. First of all, it drew people who were curious, who
mhm,
were interested in that whatever term it was, that felt the vibration of it. So there was nobody there that felt they had to be there. There was a draw to it.
mhm,
The
mhm,
process itself had been tested and but was made new again by every time it's done, participants interpret it in an interesting way. And because the outcomes, we got some really cool outcomes that but we should probably return to and say, where's the viability for this now? But that's what allowed us to have that sense of that cyclical sort of feel.
mhm. Yeah, it was so powerful, and I think when you were talking about that, you said co-created. We did, we were co-creating in all the work that
Yeah.
now this Wonderland experience has done. So talk to me a little bit about belonging and how that relates, or how does co-creating maybe generate belonging? Like, in what ways in Corliss, in the future Elevate Villages, like, how important is co-creating to belonging opposed to having some system of hierarchy, and like where does co-creating play with a partnership? Like I would love to hear some of your thoughts
That's a
on that
super,
angle.
super question. Super question. And I think we have to look at the evolution of belonging because at one point, you belonged to a family, you belonged to a country, property belonged to somebody. There was a sense of ownership. There was a sense that was a very tired and in some cases inherited version of what belonging means, and also an offshoot from belonging being a physical, my belongings. Um, in order for us to move into shared dynamics, we have to have a sense of who we are feeling in equity with, and the diversity of perspectives is vital. Just like nature, uniformity destabilizes an ecosystem, whereas diversity keeps it fluid, keeps it functioning.
Mhm.
But the moment we introduce uniformity, it destabilizes. So, belonging in a group that is wanting to co-create together is one that it allow recognizes the uniqueness of each person. It recognizes the different contributions that people make, but there's some form of foundational purpose, some form of foundational bond, that why you come into co-creation is because there's something you want to do together. There's a motivation. It can be a problem you want to solve. It can be what seems to be an intractable issue that nobody seems to be able to get any kind of solutions for whatever it might be, that's the magnet that draws the people together. That tends to be one of the most important underlying conditions, if you will, for a sense of belonging. Because then you're able, if it's belonging in an old I would say in an old power structure, belonging means that, and I see these all the time, I work in them all the time. I belong in that unit because the boss will tell me what to do. My sense of belonging is I will carry out what I'm directed to do. My sense of belonging is reinforced by how I follow the rules. That's a form of belonging. But that's not a co-creation. That is
Mm.
a following the rules, getting things done, hierarchical type of belonging. What we're talking about is obviously a very different one, and it's where we come in to actually address a problem using diversity of perspectives, and sometimes the more
Mm.
diverse, the better, to be able to come up with some approaches that we would never have done before. But you need that sense of respect, that sense of, frankly, you need love, and the sense of love that you feel for others, so that when there are disagreements and there are fallouts, because we're human beings, that sense
Mhm.
of love allows for whatever those disagreements to be worked through. Because conflict is an incredibly important tool when you're co-creating, because it's how you work it. Nature doesn't look at the bashing of the waves against a rock as conflict. It looks at it
Oh.
as it's just the normal way in which the water, see, when the water bangs up against the rock, it's getting oxygenized and
Mhm.
the rock is getting cleansed. But their are coming into in what could be appear to be conflict with each other. And yet they're both are benefiting from it in a way that we may not understand. And so we need those kinds of frictions. We need those kinds of tensions in order for us to actually break through some of our old mindsets and get some different ideas.
Wow. It's gonna take me a minute. That's And then imagine the depth of belonging. Isn't it in the like in systems of domination or hierarchy, you can bond people by having a shared enemy.
Mhm.
So like if that's in sports, like we're all bonded
Yeah,
because it's us against them.
right.
And I think our world has maybe gone that way a little too much. And there's lots of things like where the boss can make something out external or internal the enemy so that everyone
Yes.
bonds together. So I'm kind of thinking on core list moving forward into sort of a whole new future and building a new how systems could look differently. Can you imagine, or how can you imagine what would be maybe an example of how to create belonging to the depth where people will co-create and maybe have that the breaker crash or the waves crashing against the rocks? Like, what could that enemy be instead of us against them, instead of these people against those people, this political party against that political party? Could there be other frictions that would then create that belonging, that co-creation, without doing harm to the human race?
Yes. And because we gotta get rid of the word enemy, and, because we're all part of the human race, we're all part and we're part of nature, and we're all interconnected. And so, what way in which people come together and bond is often because they see a social issue that, like you did,
Mhm,
that was something that was compelling, that had not been thought through in a different way, that was so urgently needed to address it in a different way. I have mental health as mine, which I don't even call mental health anymore because it's such a broken system that we're looking for best life. Because it's not just mental, it's a holistic view. So something's broken down in our lives that our own experience. This isn't because it's a hypothetical. I'd like to make the world better.
mhm,
We are all drawn, I do believe this, to deal with circumstances that have in our lives been something that we know in our inner being is something that there has to be a different way, that there has to be another way of doing this. And that draws us into conversations with people. And as we're in conversations with people, we start to see where the interconnections were. And Corliss went through a major reset in the fall of this year. We were asked to recommit to Corliss. And in that recommitment, we had to identify what it was we were here to transform. And we also went through an abundance approach, which what do I bring? What do I need? What do I want? And so all of that information has now is now being mapped. And so we're going to start seeing over the next year, how do we find there's so many intersections of those of us in the community that are here to transform different things. You and I both share the idea of villages, and because I talked years ago about Story Living Studios, which was a same concept, but for individuals who didn't feel a sense of belonging in the world because they had experienced other forms of drama, trauma, and often by at the hands of the mental health system.
mhm.
And so we were drawn together very much around a very similar kind of let's look at how we can support these in community using different modalities. So in a correlous kind of setting, you would start to see that kind of synergies of okay, they may be different subject areas, but there's some common thinking that could help. There's common ideas of where resourcing could come from. Like, there are players inside this community and ecosystem from around the world that can provide insight, expertise, experience, which then helps others come in and come into community with each other. So the idea is we're no longer looking at resourcing individual ventures, we're resourcing transformation.
And if a transformation could lead us closer to knowing that we belong to each other,
And I think it's
we
I
as a
think it's the
whole, as a human
weave,
race.
right? It's the
Hmm.
weave. As we come into these dynamics together and start to explore together, we grow a greater sense of belonging. And as we feel a sense of belonging, we start to co-create even more.
Hmm.
And so it's a fuel in many ways that allows us to, and the thing of the way that you describe it in the ways that you have, it's an infinity. There is no limit to the fuel of belonging. We don't really know what, as a resource, it can really, truly help us explore until we actually start to work with it as a really important resource to how we actually transform how we live, how we work, and to deal with some of the fundamental issues that are still both from planet and people, and cosmic, that are asking us that need to get dealt with.
Yeah. Well, Hillary, thank you for you've opened a space for me that makes belonging so much bigger. Like it's not I think fundamentally belonging, we feel, we're egocentrical beings. Where do I belong? How do I belong? I want to belong here. But opening that up to how do we create belonging for, different groups? I mean,
Mhm.
obviously, fundamentally, I believe that as humans, we all belong to each other, and it's our responsibility every day to show up like that. Like if I see a stranger in the grocery store who's struggling, can I look at that person and say, wow, if that was my intimate partner or if that was my
Mm.
best friend, how would I show up? So if I truly believe that all humans belong together, how do I show up for that person? Like there's that view of it. But in general, looking at like moving forward in our present day into trying to make it a better day, a place where there's not so many people on the fringe, there's not so much, war. I mean, just take it to war, us against them. There is no them. There's only us. And when we hurt them, when we try to keep belonging only for us and not for them, that hurts all of us because we truly belong together is definitely what I believe. So thank you for giving us these really deep thought patterns to go, wow, how do I show up every day? And what could I do different to create belonging for others and not just be seeking it for myself?
And I would also throw this last thought in around that there's many nature elders and nature beings that want to feel a sense of belonging and that want to I do an initiative called Listening Fields with a friend of mine, Danelia Castell, and where you open the field and you have a question and a nature elder, a particular tree or body of water or what will come and provide perspectives. And if we really want to understand the full nature of of belonging, is how do we go into our backyards and get a sense of
Mm.
how do I have a sense of belonging with that tree? How do I create a relationship with the soil under my feet? Because unless we find belonging in ourselves, but also in the natural world we live in, we're still going to feel separation and segregation. So it's the
Mm.
more that belonging can also find its way. It's gonna take some time, it's gonna take, different experiences, but I think that as humans, as we start to open our energy to being recognizing the nature of belonging in nature itself, I think we'll also find that we've got a far richer field, on which to experience belonging.
Beautiful. What a, yeah, beautiful way to end today's podcast. Hillary, thank you endlessly for taking time to chat with me. And I hope that a year from now, 100 podcasts from now, or 400, how many ever from now, that I could invite you back on and we can explore this even deeper and see what season we're in at that point.
Well, I just love hanging out with you, and I've got a whole pile of questions for you. So maybe next time I interview you, and
Oh, that would be fun.
get a sense because yes, I've just loved your questions. I love the exploration. I've thought of things in this podcast that I had not thought of before. So I want to thank you for that.
You're welcome. As we end, I do want to give a special thank you and shout out to our patron, Deanna Laughlin, who's made this podcast possible. Again, Hillary, thank you. Her details will be in the description. So if you want to get to know Hillary more, her work, or Corliss, or Elevate Villages, please look below. This podcast has been brought to you by Elevate Villages, where belonging becomes a place that we build together.